Hi everyone, I've got to say particular thanks to Vina and to OPSS as well, because the journey that they've been on has not been an easy one, and the difficult questions that you guys are asking, they're all also been asking, but over many years. One of the things that we've been focusing on over the past 6 years is vulnerability disclosure particularly. And we're going to talk about that today, but I just want to address the elephant in the room here, which is we have had so many years to sort this stuff out, right? So when we talk about what are obvious passwords, well, if your username's admin, then an obvious password would be admin, right? We know what the top 10 most abused passwords are. So in terms of the what, we know what the what is, we know where the issues are, and we also know how to fix them. So there seems to be a bit of unnecessary whining going on right now. And to those people who are whining, I'd say shut up, because you're not in a position to be doing this. Or either that, or just get out of IoT, because we don't want your products on the market. So if you don't know what needs to be done, then you don't know how to use Google. So to be frank about it, you need to get your house in order, because we've had many, many years, right? So 2015, we had the first IoTSF conference at Bletchley Park. We raised many of these issues then, and the IoTSF have done a fantastic job over the years in terms of raising these issues, putting together guidance. Obviously, we've got a biased audience here because you guys are all expert enough and intelligent enough to come to this and to learn and to be participating. But what you'll see in this presentation is the effect of companies, basically willful ignorance. I think that's the only way that I can kind of describe it, because we see in the press every day about IoT security and insecurity. So there's no way of getting away from it. So myself and Rohan, we both work for Copper Horse, and we've been working quite closely together. Also, my colleague Mark, who's upstairs on the car hacking rig. We also do a lot of automotive and roadside security stuff at the moment. We just want to talk about this report that we've been doing for the past 6 years. So the background is that essentially we originally came up with this idea because what we wanted to do was look at the insecurity canaries, and that's what I call these things. So this is one of the few things that we can measure in terms of how do we measure product security in a company and what things are publicly exposed that they can't get around. So vulnerability disclosure requires you to have a public point of contact. What we can do is go and have a look at all of those different manufacturers and simply find, is there a way for security researchers to contact that company? And then we record the details, right? So we've been doing that for 6 years. Initially, we started out less than 10% of companies of the 331 manufacturers that we looked at around the world, all from popular products from retailers that we know and love. Less than 10% of those had a vulnerability disclosure policy or any way to contact them on security. And that's kind of steadily progressed, and we'll see some stats on that as we go. And obviously, in relation to government action around the world, well, vulnerability disclosure has become quite popular. There's a long history to vulnerability disclosure. I'd urge you to go and look up Rainforest Puppy if you want to kind of see different variants of how vulnerability disclosure was done. There was a thing about bug track yesterday. There's a long history going back to the Morris worm, basically, and full disclosure and those kind of activities. So this has been something that's really been around probably even earlier than that. But let's say 1993, and then that debate kind of raged, and we settled on an ISO standard in 2014, which Katie, Missouri managed to campaign ISO to make it public. When ISO got the opportunity, they decided that they were going to close off that public access. So 2018 version isn't even publicly available anymore, which is a bit of a shame, just a reflection on closed standards, I think. Thankfully, organizations like the IoTSF have freely available, freely accessible standards and recommendations, and that makes it easier for adoption. So does Etsy. Etsy EN 3645, free to download, free to read. make sure that more people are going to be able to adopt it. And also, it allows for transparency and scrutiny. So actually, if we get it wrong, then people can point that out quite publicly. So that's my advert for open standards. But all of the reports that we've done are freely available and through IoTSF or through our own website. But we've also published the data as open data under Creative Commons 4.0 license. So all of the data going back to our original report is available and you can freely use it. And the reason that we did this in the first place, we do this for a lot of our work, is we want it to be used. We don't just want to do the work and for it to be completely closed. So we have already been contacted by many different organizations who want to say, right, okay, we want to look at the different kind of manufacturers that you're looking at and the different mechanisms they use in our business. So our report was supported by HackerOne. They use the data in their own business to kind of try and target those companies that aren't doing vulnerability disclosure to go and basically sell them services. We know that governments and regulators around the world are looking at the data, again, to look at who the bad actors are. So there's multiple benefits to it, and we encourage others to use it as you see fit. So without further ado, I've been kind of leading up to the main event here, which is that Rohan's going to reveal to you the results of this year's report, our 6th report, and how progress has gone so far.
So yeah, before we get into the actual figures, it was probably good to talk about how we find vulnerability disclosure policy. So when we talk about vulnerability disclosure policy, we talk about a detectable vulnerability disclosure policy. So there are companies that have private vulnerability disclosure schemes and bug bounties, but we're doing a web search, a site search, we're looking for a /security page and a security.txt file. So this year, we found that over 75% of the companies in our data set did not have a point of contact for a security researcher to report a vulnerability to them. So here we've got 23.99%, or only 107 of the 446 companies in our data set this year had a policy. We've also got this core data set here, which I'll get into the reason why we have these two different data sets in a minute, which is the data set carried over from 2022, which is 31%. So slightly better, but not a huge improvement. So understanding the recalibrated data. So this is where we have the core and the expanded data set. So this year, so every year, we look to add new companies to both stay up to date with the popular products and also refill the data set, because inevitably as the 6 years have gone on, companies go under, products stop getting sold, etc. So this year, we also reviewed our retailer list to make sure it was a more representative sample of global retailers, and we then added 121 new companies. So of those 121 new companies, only 6 had a vulnerability disclosure policy. I'll see if I can read them out because there's so little. AVM, Hive, Honor, Tuya, Fin, and iRobot. So fair play to those guys. So as you can see, the upwards trend has halted. I mean, it wasn't a particularly great upwards trend anyway. It was about 4% each year. But the first year in the 6 years of doing this research that our data set has not increased, and in fact has actually decreased this year. CVD has, so coordinated vulnerability disclosure has stayed as the preferred method of policies this year, with only 4 companies using non-disclosure policies, which is, I guess, some silver lining. And as you can see here, we've extrapolated the data for both of the data sets to see, I mean, the top line here is the core data set, which is a similar trend to what we noticed last year, about 2039 for 100% compliance. And for the expanded data set, it's even worse, 2045. And with the PSTI Act coming into effect next year, that is, yeah. So each year, we check against this threshold test, which we based on the PSTI Act, which the first test being basically having a detectable vulnerability disclosure policy, and the second test being whether they include timeline information in that policy. And this year, the results were about 10%, less than 10% would pass both the first and the second part of that test, meaning only 10% of the companies in our data set would be compliant with the PSTI Act. And this here is that 10%. You can have a little look, see the good ones. So here we've got regional retailers. I'll let you guys have a little look at the companies, but we had a look at different retailers, different popular retailers. So as I said, we expanded our retailer list, and we selected the top retailers in certain regions. And here are the results from the EU, the UK, and the United States. And that's because those areas both have, or all three have, upcoming legislation in various different stages that mandates the use of vulnerability disclosure. So the highlights were John Lewis, best of the bunch, followed by MediaMarkt in the EU and Target in the US.
So this is the first time that we've done this before, and we're kind of moving into the retailer space because obviously one of the enforcement actions that could take place was the products would be pulled from the market. So the retailer, or in the UK, the distributor under that would have some kind of liability around that. So we kind of matched up what we'd done, kind of reversed back around to where we'd picked up the popular products in the research. Then we looked at the manufacturers to see what they were doing, and then we came back again to see actually, to what degree was that a sort of quality retailer? Yeah. And I guess obviously, John Lewis, well, their advertising seems to be reasonably correct.
And here's just a nice infographic of the regional differences between companies headquartered in the different regions. So the three, obviously, you can see there, US, EU, US, EU, and Asia, all doing fairly similarly, around 20-25%. And the small number that we've captured in the bottom three regions, not a huge amount of companies headquartered in those regions, but none of the ones that we've captured had any vulnerability disclosure policies. So each year we break down our data based on the product category. And I think each year we basically say in our report that the usual trend continues. We have product categories like TV, laptops and PCs, and mobile doing exceptionally well, TV at 100%. And then on the other side, we have less mature product categories like wearables or leisure and hobbies that do not perform as well. I mean, leisure and hobbies is here with 0%, and wearables, I think, is around 16%. So a few other findings. We look at proxy disclosure and bug bounties each time we come around to this research. And this year we found 27 organizations using proxy disclosure companies. But this year, somewhat interestingly, we found 3 new proxy disclosure companies. So usually we always see BugCrowd and HackerOne as the 2 companies that people choose to host their policies with. And this year we saw 3 new entries, which were Bugbase, Integrity, and Yes We Hack, which is nice to see new entrants to the market. And then also, we found 29 organizations using bug bounties, so offering a financial reward for reporting of vulnerabilities to them. Last year in our report, we spoke about a lack of clarity in policies, sort of generally in the talking points section of our report. And this year, in the security.txt area, we found that companies were implementing it, but they were implementing it wrong. So there's a guide that the organization that runs it has, and it has an expiration policy as one of the options. But we'd often find that a company would have a security.txt file, but it would either be expired in the past, so security researchers wouldn't know if that's still maintained. If they report something to that point of contact, will that report be received? And equally, there are companies setting their expiration dates for 100 years in the future, which, whilst maybe not as bad as it being completely expired, also is basically, like not having a policy that's, the expiration date is then nullified. Back to you.
Yeah, so clearly, I kind of wanted this to report to suddenly show a change in the direction into a sort of hockey stick curve of adoption in fear of the UK. Right?
Hoped every year. We always say,
yeah, we always
next
hope.
year.
Yeah. But the reality is very different. The reality is one of ambivalence. The numbers don't lie. You either are doing that or you're not. And in most cases, they're not. I should say that obviously we are looking at the volume of the actual manufacturers themselves, not the volume of the products in the market. So the companies that you saw on the green list there obviously represent a very large proportion of the overall market in terms of volume of products sold. But of course, I always feel that security shouldn't be a luxury for the rich. And this is part of what we wanted to do with the UK's Code of Practice and the other IoT work around the world, because it doesn't matter who uses it or how much they paid for it, that everyone will suffer the bad effects, essentially. So we need to provide that security for all. And so, companies that are selling webcams for £20, well, they also need to get their act together, not just your Amazons and your Apples and so on. So it's a kind of another warning that we need to I guess, probably showing that regulation was the right thing to do around the world, because we've had plenty of time, years and years and years, and still none of these companies are reacting to it. So hopefully next year we'll come back with a better homework report. But it's pretty unacceptable, isn't it? 76%. So there we go. Sorry, it's so negative. Thanks particularly to Rohan and also to IoTSF and HackerOne for the support. Thank you.
Thanks.